I am Aria, 32 years old. A few weeks ago, a violent car crash changed my life forever. While I was bleeding internally in an emergency room bed, my parents rejected the doctor's calls. They chose to attend my sister's award ceremony instead of coming to see if I would survive the night. My own mother texted me later, saying they couldn't waste time visiting me when my sister was out there making the family proud. They laughed and celebrated with their high society friends while I lay completely alone. But there was one thing they did not know. They had no idea about a secret legal document, an irrevocable trust involving our family real estate, that my grandparents left entirely in my name. And now, as they face total bankruptcy, a federal lawsuit, and the crushing weight of their golden child's crimes, they are begging on my doorstep. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little world with nothing but cold, hard facts, hit the like button if you believe in justice. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now, let us go back to where the nightmare began. The sound of twisting metal and shattering glass is something you never truly forget. It replays in your mind when the room goes quiet. I was driving home from my job as a project manager at an IT firm. It had been a long, exhausting Tuesday. I had just gotten a promotion, a solid bump in my salary, and I was looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and my bed. I was passing through an intersection when a heavy SUV ran a red light and T-boned the driver's side of my sedan. The impact was deafening. My car flipped twice before skidding upside down across the asphalt. I remember the overwhelming smell of burning rubber and gasoline, the sharp, blinding pain in my chest, and then, absolute darkness. I woke up to the harsh, fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit. Every single breath felt like inhaling broken glass. The paramedics later told me it was a miracle I survived at all. I had severe internal bleeding, 2 fractured ribs, and my left leg was shattered, held together by pins and plates after an emergency surgery. The physical pain was excruciating, but the emotional realization that followed was what truly broke me. Dr. Evans, a kind, soft-spoken man with tired eyes, stood by my bed holding a clipboard. He asked me how I was feeling and gently checked my vitals. Then, his expression shifted to one of deep discomfort. He explained that since my admission, the hospital administration had tried calling my emergency contacts my parents no less than 7 times. The nurses left urgent voicemails explaining that I was in critical condition and heading into surgery. Dr. Evans himself had tried calling my father's cell phone. The phone rang, someone picked up, and upon hearing it was the hospital calling about my accident, they simply hung up. Subsequent calls were sent straight to voicemail. I stared at the stark white ceiling of the hospital room. My ribs screamed in agony, but a different kind of pain settled heavy in my chest. They knew. They knew I was broken, bleeding, and potentially dying, and they actively chose to press the decline button. I tried to make excuses for them in my head. Maybe they thought it was a scam. Maybe they were dealing with an emergency of their own. I lay there for 5 days, watching the door, jumping at every footstep in the hallway, hoping to see my mother's face or hear my father's booming voice. Nobody came. Not a single phone call. Not a single text. I was utterly and completely alone in the darkest moment of my life. On the 6th day, a family friend who lived a few towns over happened to hear about the crash through the local grapevine. She came to visit me, bringing a small balloon and a sympathetic smile. She sat by my bed and casually mentioned how beautiful my sister Chloe looked at her award ceremony. I stared at her, completely confused. I asked her what she was talking about. Her face dropped. She realized I had no idea. As it turned out, the night I was fighting for my life in the operating room, my parents were attending a lavish gala. Chloe, my 29-year-old sister, was receiving some regional young business leader award. Our family friend pulled up her social media feed to show me. There they were. My father, Robert, looking incredibly smug in a tailored tuxedo. My mother, Evelyn, dripping in jewelry, holding a glass of champagne. And right in the middle was Chloe, wearing a designer gown, holding a crystal trophy like she had just cured a major disease. A few hours after our family friend left, my phone finally buzzed. It was a text from my mother. It was not a question asking if I was alive. It was a forwarded picture from the gala. The caption she typed out read, "We could not miss this once-in-a-lifetime accomplishment. Your sister is brilliant." I stared at the screen. My hand shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. I typed back, demanding to know how they could ignore the hospital's calls. I told them I almost died. I told them I was in the ICU for days. My mother's response came back a few minutes later, completely void of any maternal instinct. She wrote, "You are an adult, Arya. You have insurance. It is pointless to waste time sitting in a depressing hospital room when your sister is out there making the family proud. You should be happy for her instead of making everything about you." I did not reply. I locked the screen and set the phone face down on the bedside table. I did not cry. The tears simply refused to come. In that exact moment, the desperate, hoping child inside me finally died. I realized my obedience, my independence, and my quiet success would never earn their love. They had made their choice. They chose the golden child. And right then, staring at the cold hospital walls, I made my choice too. I was done. I would never ask them for anything ever again, and I would never allow them to hurt me again. The hospital discharged me a few days later. I arranged for a medical transport service to take me back to my apartment. Learning to navigate my own living space on crutches with broken ribs was a nightmare. Every simple task, from making a cup of coffee to taking a shower, required monumental effort and caused blinding pain. During those long, quiet hours alone on my couch, my mind wandered back to the past. The blatant favoritism was not new. It was the foundation our entire family dynamic was built upon. Growing up, Chloe was the sun, and I was just a rock orbiting in the cold darkness. Whatever Chloe wanted, she got. When it was time for college, my parents liquidated a significant portion of their investments to pay her tuition at a prestigious, out-of-state private university. They bought her a brand new car as a graduation present. They funded her lifestyle, her designer clothes, and her European vacations. When it was my turn to go to college, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that character is built through struggle. He said they could not afford to help me and that I needed to figure it out myself. So, I did. I worked night shifts at a local diner and took out student loans to put myself through a state college. I managed my finances rigidly. I built my own college fund from tips and minimum wage paychecks. I graduated with a degree in computer science, landed a stable job, and worked my way up the corporate ladder. My parents never cared about my achievements. At Thanksgiving dinners, my father would loudly boast to our extended family about Chloe's new title as a director at a major logistics firm. When an aunt or uncle would politely ask about my job, my mother would wave her hand dismissively and call me a computer repair girl. They viewed my career in IT project management as boring and working class. They were obsessed with status, with the appearance of wealth. My father financed a luxury Porsche he could barely afford just to park it in the driveway and impress the neighbors at the local HOA meetings. They lived in a constant state of pretending to be elite, and Chloe was their perfect, shiny accessory. I was just the disappointment who chose a practical life over a glamorous one. I spent years trying to win their approval. I remembered transferring a portion of my early salary to help them pay off a credit card bill, hoping they would see my value. They took the money, thanked Chloe for advising them on financial matters, and completely ignored my contribution. Sitting on my couch, nursing my shattered leg, I let all those memories wash over me. I allowed myself to feel the anger I had suppressed for decades. I promised myself that the Bank of Aria was permanently closed. I had built a solid life, a robust 401k, and significant savings entirely on my own. It was mine, and they would never touch a single dime of it again. About a week after I returned home, the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. My friends from out of state had sent care packages, and my coworkers had arranged for meal deliveries, but no one was scheduled to visit. I painstakingly hoisted myself up onto my crutches and hobbled toward the front door. I looked through the peephole and felt my stomach drop. It was my parents. They stood on my welcome mat. My mother was clutching a cheap bouquet of grocery store flowers. My father was nervously checking his expensive watch. They had not seen me in over a month. They had not called to see if I made it home. I considered pretending I was asleep, but a dark curiosity took over. I wanted to see exactly how low they could sink. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My mother immediately plastered a fake, trembling smile on her face. "Arya, sweetie, you look terrible," she said, stepping inside without being invited. My father followed, his eyes darting around my modest but well-furnished apartment. I did not offer them a seat. I leaned heavily on my crutches and stared at them. "Save the performance, Evelyn," I said. My voice was raspy, completely stripped of any warmth. "What do you want?" My mother's fake smile vanished, instantly replaced by a mask of absolute tragedy. She burst into theatrical tears. "It is your sister," she wailed, collapsing onto my sofa. "She is in trouble. Terrible, terrible trouble." My father stepped forward, his face pale and sweating. "Chloe has been arrested," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper as if the neighbors could hear through the walls. "The FBI raided her corporate office 2 days ago. It is a massive misunderstanding, of course. A witch hunt. But they are charging her with wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." I stood perfectly still. The golden child, the brilliant director, the pride of the family, was sitting in a federal holding cell. I felt a strange, cold sense of validation, but I kept my face entirely neutral. "And why are you telling me this?" I asked. My father swallowed hard. "The authorities have frozen her accounts. We have spent every liquid asset we have on retaining a high-powered defense lawyer for her. The judge set her bail at $500,000. We need to secure a bail bondsman, and we need a massive cash deposit today." He looked right at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, greedy light. "We know you have money saved up, Arya. You live so frugally, and you just got that promotion. We need you to empty your savings accounts and transfer the funds to us immediately. It is the only way to get your sister out." I looked at the cheap bodega flowers sitting on my coffee table. Then I looked at the parents who had abandoned me to die in a hospital bed so they could watch their criminal daughter accept a fake award. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They did not come to comfort me. They came to use me as an ATM to bail out their precious felon. I took a deep, painful breath. My ribs ached, but my mind was crystal clear. "No," I said. It was a single, flat syllable. The room went dead silent. My mother stopped her theatrical sobbing and stared at me, her mouth hanging open. "What did you just say?" she whispered. I said no. "I am not giving you a single cent. I am not emptying my savings. I am not bailing her out." I leaned slightly on my crutches, squaring my shoulders despite the searing pain in my leg. My father's face turned a violent shade of red. The mask of the concerned parent completely disintegrated, revealing the furious, entitled tyrant underneath. "Are you out of your mind?" he barked, taking a step toward me. "Your sister is sitting in a jail cell. She is terrified. This is your family. You are obligated to help us." "Obligated?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that hurt my chest. Where was this family obligation when I was bleeding out in the wreckage of my car? Where was my family when the trauma surgeon was trying to reconstruct my leg? You ignored the hospital's calls to go drink champagne at a gala honoring a thief. My mother stood up, pointing a manicured finger at me. "How dare you call her a thief? This is all a mistake. And you are just jealous. You have always been jealous of her success. You are using this terrible situation to punish us. We have already lost one child to this ridiculous justice system, and now we are losing another because you are punishing us for loving her more." The absolute delusion in her words was staggering. I looked her dead in the eye. "You are right about one thing, Evelyn. You did love her more. You loved the fake prestige she brought you. But I am not punishing you. I am simply matching your energy. You told me my hospital stay was a waste of your time. Well, bailing your criminal daughter out of a federal indictment is a waste of my money." My father slammed his fist against the wall, rattling the picture frames. "You ungrateful, cold-blooded bitch," he roared. "We gave you life. We put a roof over your head. If you do not transfer that money right now, I swear to God, I will disown you. You will be dead to us." I looked at him, completely unfazed by his rage. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. "You disowned me the night you rejected the doctor's phone call, Robert. Now, you have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my apartment before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." They stared at me in absolute shock. They expected me to cower, to cry, to beg for their approval by handing over my life savings. Instead, they found a woman who no longer cared if they lived or died. My father grabbed my mother's arm, muttering curses under his breath, and they stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door so hard the hinges groaned. I engaged the deadbolt, limped back to the couch, and finally let out a long, shaky breath. The war had officially begun. By the next morning, the scandal had hit the local news and the business pages of the national papers. The scale of Chloe's deception was staggering. She was not just a participant, she was the central hub of a massive embezzlement ring within her logistics firm. The authorities discovered that she had been funneling millions of corporate dollars into offshore accounts and shell companies for nearly 3 years. The most poetic part of the entire broadcast was the revelation about her precious award. The regional young business leader accolade had essentially been bought. Chloe had used the embezzled funds to make massive donations to the organization's board, securing the trophy to boost her corporate profile. The award ceremony my parents chose over my life was literally funded by stolen money. The fallout for my parents was immediate and devastating. My father's high society facade crumbled overnight. The country clubs suspended their membership pending the investigation. His business associates, terrified of being linked to a federal money laundering probe, cut all ties with him. My father lost his biggest client within 48 hours. But the rot went much deeper than social disgrace. Through a mutual acquaintance in the banking sector, I learned the truth about my parents' finances. They were drowning. They had been living on credit for a decade to maintain the illusion of wealth. That luxury Porsche my father loved to parade around the neighborhood? He was 3 months behind on the lease payments. Their credit cards were maxed out from funding Evelyn's country club luncheons and designer wardrobe. They had zero liquid assets. They were standing on the edge of a financial cliff, and Chloe's arrest was the wind that pushed them over. It suddenly made perfect sense why they were so frantic in my living room. They did not just want my money to save Chloe. They wanted my savings to save themselves. They expected me to drain the accounts I had meticulously built over years of hard work to pay off their debts, hire a luxury legal team, and keep their sinking ship afloat. They viewed me not as a daughter, but as an emergency insurance policy they could cash out when their primary investment failed. Sitting at my kitchen island, sipping my coffee, I felt a deep, profound sense of disgust. I opened my laptop and checked my investment portfolios, my high-yield savings accounts, and my retirement funds. Every single penny was secure. I had built a fortress around my life, and I was not about to let 3 drowning narcissists drag me down into the abyss with them. I turned off the news, closed my laptop, and focused on my physical therapy exercises. Let them burn. 2 days later, an email popped into my inbox. The sender address was unfamiliar, but the subject line made my blood run cold. "Please Aria, I need you." It was from Chloe. Since she did not have access to a personal phone in the county holding facility, She had convinced one of her old college friends to type out and send a message on her behalf. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the delete button. Part of me knew it would be another manipulation tactic, another attempt to weaponize guilt. But my analytical brain needed to know her angle. I clicked open the email. It was a masterpiece of victimhood. Chloe wrote that she was terrified, sleeping on a concrete slab, surrounded by dangerous criminals. She swore up and down that she was innocent. She claimed she was being framed by the senior executives at her firm. According to her story, the higher-ups were the real masterminds of the fraud, and when the FBI started sniffing around, they used her as a convenient scapegoat because she managed the regional accounts. She begged me to believe her. She wrote, "You are the only smart one in the family, Arya. You know how corrupt these corporations are. Please, use your savings to get me out so I can fight this and save our family from being completely destroyed." I read the email twice. The manipulation was incredibly slick. She was playing to my intellect, pretending to respect my career, and pushing the save the family narrative my parents loved so much. But I am an IT project manager. I specialize in data verification and risk assessment. I do not deal in tears, I deal in facts. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. Marcus and I had been close friends since our college days. He had gone on to become a sharp, ruthless corporate defense attorney. If anyone could cut through the legal jargon and find the actual truth of the federal indictment, it was him. I explained the situation, forwarded him Chloe's email, and asked him to leverage his network to find out what the prosecution actually had on her. "Give me 48 hours, Marcus said, his tone dead serious. "If she is telling the truth and being railroaded, I will tell you. But if she is lying, Arya, you need to be prepared to walk away completely." I promised him I was already walking away, but I needed absolute confirmation. I needed the ammunition to shut down my family's delusions permanently. True to his word, Marcus called me 2 days later. He suggested we meet at his office downtown. I navigated the marble floors with my crutches, my ribs aching dull but manageable. Sitting in his leather chairs, surrounded by law books, I felt a strange sense of calm. Marcus did not sugarcoat it. "Arya, your sister is lying through her teeth," he said, sliding a thick legal pad across the desk. I spoke to a colleague who is adjacent to the federal prosecutor's office. "Chloe is not a scapegoat. She is the primary architect of the scheme." He detailed the evidence. The authorities had a massive paper trail. Chloe had not only initiated the fraudulent transfers, but she had actively recruited lower-level employees to help conceal the funds. And the worst part? When she realized her boss was getting suspicious, she tried to blackmail him into silence, demanding a larger cut of the corporate bonus pool to keep her own scheme quiet. She was incredibly guilty, and she was looking at serious federal prison time. I nodded slowly, absorbing the information. It was exactly as I suspected. She was trying to play me for a fool one last time. But then, Marcus leaned forward, steepling his fingers. His eyes gleamed with a predatory intelligence. "That is not the only thing I looked into, Arya. When I was running background checks on your family's assets to see the scope of the financial damage, I stumbled across something your parents have buried very, very deeply." He pulled a thick, manila folder from his desk drawer and placed it in front of me. It was stamped with the seal of the county probate court. "I dug into your grandparents' estate," Marcus explained softly. "Your parents have been living in that massive colonial house in the suburbs for years, acting like they own it. They have been borrowing against their own credit, pretending that property is their ultimate safety net." I frowned, confused. My father inherited that house when my grandfather passed away 5 years ago. Marcus smiled, a cold, sharp smile. "That is what Robert told everyone. But your grandfather knew exactly what kind of man your father was. He knew Robert would squander the family wealth to maintain a fake image." Marcus tapped the folder. 5 years ago, before he died, your grandfather quietly established an irrevocable trust. He bypassed your father entirely. The deed to that house, the property your parents are currently sitting in, was placed into that trust. And Arya, you are the sole beneficiary. They do not own a single brick of that property. You do. I sat frozen in the chair. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My parents were facing financial ruin. They were desperate for cash to save Chloe and themselves. And the roof over their heads, their ultimate symbol of status, actually belonged to the daughter they had treated like garbage for 32 years. I looked down at the legal documents. The weapon was loaded. The storm was coming, and for the first time in my life, I was the one controlling the lightning. When a toxic family realizes they can no longer control you, they will immediately try to control how other people see you. That is rule number 1 in their playbook. I knew my parents would not just accept my refusal and walk away quietly. They needed a villain for their tragedy, and since they could not accept that their golden child was a criminal, I was the perfect target. The smear campaign started less than 24 hours after I kicked them out of my apartment. My phone began buzzing with messages from extended family members I had not spoken to since the last awkward Thanksgiving dinner. Most of them were fishing for information, asking if I was feeling okay or if the rumors were true. I did not reply to any of them. Then, I received a call from my cousin Leo. Leo was one of the few decent people in our bloodline, a guy who worked hard, minded his own business, and never bought into my father's arrogant posturing. Leo did not beat around the bush. He told me that my mother had been working the phones nonstop. Evelyn had called every aunt, uncle, and second cousin in our contact list, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance of the grieving, heartbroken mother. According to Evelyn, I was sitting on a massive pile of wealth, laughing at my sister's misfortune. She completely omitted the fact that I was recovering from a near-fatal car crash. She conveniently forgot to mention that she and my father had ignored my emergency room phone calls to attend a gala funded by stolen money. In her twisted narrative, I was a cold-blooded monster harboring decades of petty jealousy, using this federal lawsuit as a weapon to destroy our family out of pure spite. Leo warned me that my father was calling a mandatory family meeting that coming Sunday. They were hosting it at my grandparents' old colonial house, the property my parents currently occupied and paraded around as their own estate. My father had explicitly told the extended family that I was summoned to this meeting as a final intervention. It was an ultimatum. He intended to publicly shame me into handing over my savings. If I refused in front of the entire bloodline, I would be formally excommunicated. I thanked Leo for the heads up. I hung up the phone and felt a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to put me on trial in front of the entire family. I decided right then and there that I would give them exactly what they asked for. But I was not going to show up as the helpless scapegoat they expected. I spent the next 3 days working closely with Marcus, my lawyer. We went over every single page of the irrevocable trust my grandfather had established. We pulled the original property deeds, the tax records, and the transfer of ownership documents. Marcus also gathered the final, unsealed court filings regarding my sister's federal indictment. We organized everything into neat, labeled black binders. I was not going to argue with my parents. I was not going to yell or defend my character. I was going to let the United States legal system do the talking. Sunday afternoon arrived with a heavy, gray overcast. I dressed meticulously. I wore a tailored, charcoal gray blazer, dark slacks, and sensible flats. I wanted to look exactly like the successful, independent professional they always mocked me for being. My ribs were still sore, and I needed one crutch to walk comfortably, but I held my head high. Marcus drove us to the colonial house in his sleek sedan. We pulled into the long, sweeping driveway. My father's beloved, unpaid-for luxury Porsche was parked near the garage, looking ridiculously out of place next to the practical cars of my aunts and uncles. We walked up the brick pathway to the front porch. I could hear the murmur of voices inside. Marcus looked at me, adjusting his suit tie. He asked me if I was ready to burn the bridge. I looked at the heavy oak front door. I told him the bridge was already gone, we were just here to clear away the ashes. I pushed the door open without knocking. The low chatter in the massive living room died instantly. There must have been 20 people gathered there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all sitting on the plush furniture my parents had bought on credit. My mother was clutching a tissue, dabbing her dry eyes. My father stood near the grand fireplace, looking like a lord addressing his peasants. And right beside him stood a man I did not recognize, wearing a cheap suit and holding a leather briefcase. Every eye turned to me. The silence was heavy, thick with judgment and anticipation. I did not shrink back. I leaned on my crutch, stepped into the room, and let Marcus close the door firmly behind us. The trap was officially sprung, but they had no idea who the prey actually was. My father stared at Marcus with a mixture of confusion and immediate hostility. He puffed out his chest, stepping away from the fireplace. He demanded to know who I had brought into his house. His voice was loud, designed to establish dominance right out of the gate. I stood near the entryway, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I introduced Marcus as my legal counsel. A collective gasp rippled through the room. My Aunt Clara, a sharp-eyed woman who never bought into my parents' nonsense, leaned forward in her chair, clearly intrigued. My mother let out a dramatic, trembling sigh, burying her face in her hands. My father's face flushed an ugly shade of crimson. He pointed a finger at me, his voice booming off the vaulted ceilings. "A lawyer? You bring a lawyer to a family meeting? This is exactly the kind of cold, calculated behavior your mother and I have been talking about. We are dealing with a family crisis. Your sister is facing the ruin of her entire life, and you treat us like a hostile corporate takeover." I did not take the bait. I simply looked at him, my expression completely blank. I asked him why I was summoned. My father straightened his jacket, looking around the room to ensure he had his audience's full attention. He gestured to the stranger standing next to him. He introduced the man as a mortgage broker. He then turned his full, righteous fury back onto me. "Since you have decided to turn your back on your own flesh and blood," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "your mother and I are forced to take extreme measures. We will not abandon Chloe the way you have. We are parents. We protect our children. Since you refuse to unlock your savings, I am taking out a massive second mortgage on this estate. I am pulling the equity out of the family home to pay for Chloe's defense team and secure her bail." He paused, letting the weight of his sacrifice sink into the minds of our relatives. Several of my aunts nodded sympathetically. My father looked right at me, a cruel, victorious smirk playing on his lips. He told the room that he had invited me here so everyone could witness the consequences of my selfishness. He said he wanted the entire family to know that if they ever lost this beautiful house, if the bank ever took it away, the blame would fall squarely on my shoulders. He called me a failure of a daughter. He said my jealousy over Chloe's success had finally poisoned my soul completely. He finished his grand speech by stating that once the broker finalized the paperwork today, I would no longer be welcome in their lives. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother looked up through her fingers, waiting to see me break down. My father stood tall, waiting for my tears, waiting for me to crack under the weight of public humiliation and beg for forgiveness. They wanted me to write a check just to make the shame stop. I looked at the mortgage broker. He seemed incredibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I looked at my aunts and uncles, many of whom were avoiding my gaze. And then I looked at my father. He was so incredibly smug, so certain of his absolute authority. I felt a genuine, relaxed smile form on my face. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 32 years walking on eggshells, only to realize she was wearing steel-toed boots. I turned my head slightly and nodded to Marcus. It was time. Let them dig the grave as deep as they wanted. We were about to bury them in it. Marcus stepped forward. The entire energy in the room shifted. He did not yell. He did not match my father's theatrical volume. He spoke in the calm, measured tone of a predator who has already won the hunt. He looked directly at the mortgage broker. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "I highly suggest you pack up your briefcase and leave immediately. Unless you want your firm to be investigated for severe lending fraud." My father stepped between Marcus and the broker. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped. "This is my property. I have every right to leverage the equity." Marcus unclasped his black leather binder. He pulled out a thick stack of documents, complete with the blue seals of the county probate court. He walked over to the large mahogany dining table and laid the documents out flat. "Actually, Robert, you do not," Marcus replied calmly. "You do not own this house. You do not own the land it sits on. You have absolutely zero equity to leverage. You are, from a strict legal standpoint, a glorified tenant." My father laughed. It was a harsh, nervous sound. He told Marcus he was insane. He claimed he inherited the house when his father passed away 5 years ago, that everyone in the family knew it. Marcus picked up the top document and held it up. "5 years ago, your father, a man who clearly saw right through your financial incompetence, established an irrevocable trust. He knew you were drowning in credit card debt. He knew you were leasing cars you could not afford to impress people who do not care about you. He knew if he left this house to you, you would mortgage it to the ground and lose the family legacy." Marcus turned to the gathered family members. "So, he bypassed his son entirely. He deeded this entire estate, free and clear, into the trust." My father's face went from crimson to stark white in a matter of seconds. He lunged forward, snatching the document from Marcus's hand. His eyes darted rapidly across the legal text. My mother stopped crying. The room was so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "Who?" my father whispered, his voice trembling. "Who is the beneficiary?" Marcus looked at me. I stepped forward, leaning on my crutch. I looked my father dead in the eye. "I am," I said softly. My voice sliced through the tension like a scalpel. "I am the sole owner of this property. I have been for 5 years." The color completely drained from my mother's face. She let out a small, strangled gasp and gripped the armrest of her chair. The mortgage broker, realizing he had almost authorized a fraudulent loan on a property the applicant did not own, quietly zipped his briefcase and slipped out the front door without saying a single word. My father stared at the document, his hands shaking violently. "No," he muttered. "No, this is a forgery. This is illegal. You stole this from me." Marcus shook his head. "It is ironclad, Robert. Filed, stamped, and legally binding. You cannot take out a mortgage on this house to save Chloe. You cannot sell it. You cannot do anything but sit in it, entirely by the grace of your daughter's patience. A patience, I might add, that you just publicly exhausted." The illusion of their wealth, their power, and their control shattered into a million pieces right there on the living room rug. They had built their entire superiority complex on a foundation of sand, and I had just summoned the ocean. But I was not finished. They had called this meeting to humiliate me. I was going to make sure the family knew exactly who they were dealing with. Before my parents could even process the reality that they were living in my house, Marcus opened the second binder. He pulled out a stack of manila envelopes and began passing them around to my aunts and uncles. "Now that we have clarified the real estate situation," Marcus said, pacing the room, "let us address the reason Robert wanted to steal the equity in the first place. The tragic, innocent scapegoat, Chloe." My mother jumped up. "Stop it!" she shrieked. "You will not slander my daughter in this house." "It is my house, Evelyn," I reminded her coldly. "And it is not slander if it is federal evidence." I watched as my relatives pulled out the contents of the envelopes. Marcus had provided copies of the unsealed federal indictment. It detailed everything. The wire fraud. The offshore accounts. The fact that Chloe had used the stolen corporate funds to buy her own business awards and fund her luxury vacations. But the most damning piece of paper was the transcript of an email Chloe had sent to her direct supervisor. She was not a victim. When she realized the FBI was auditing the company, she tried to blackmail her boss, demanding $1 million payout to keep her mouth shut about her own crimes. Aunt Clara adjusted her reading glasses, scanning the indictment. Her face hardened into a mask of pure disgust. She looked up at my father. She tried to blackmail her own company? Clara asked, her voice sharp. You told me she was framed by the CEO. You looked me in the eye and swore she was an innocent victim of a corporate witch hunt. My father stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. He looked like a deflated balloon. Uncle David stood up. He was a quiet, hard-working man, and he looked absolutely furious. He tossed the documents onto the coffee table. You know what? This makes perfect sense. 3 years ago, Chloe came to me crying. She said she needed a $50,000 loan to launch a startup. I gave her the money from my retirement fund. The startup never happened. When I asked Robert about it, he told me I was being greedy and trying to ruin her career. I never saw a dime of that money again. She used my 401k to buy designer bags. The dam broke. Suddenly, the living room erupted. Other relatives started speaking up. A cousin admitted Robert had pressured him to co-sign an auto loan he defaulted on. Another aunt revealed Evelyn had borrowed expensive jewelry for a country club event and claimed it was lost, only for the aunt to see Evelyn wearing it in a Facebook photo a year later. The family had spent years turning a blind eye to my parents' toxic behavior, assuming it was just eccentric snobbery. But seeing the raw, legal proof of Chloe's massive fraud, and realizing my parents were willing to steal my inheritance to protect her, broke the spell completely. My father tried to shout over the commotion, demanding respect, demanding that they remember they were blood. But nobody was listening to him anymore. Aunt Clara stood up, grabbed her purse, and looked at my mother with absolute contempt. You two sicken me, Clara said. You left Arya in a hospital bed to go take pictures with a criminal. And now you try to steal the house right out from under her. You deserve everything that is coming to you. One by one, my extended family walked out. They did not say goodbye to Robert or Evelyn. A few of them stopped to squeeze my shoulder or offer a tight, apologetic smile as they passed me. Within 10 minutes, the massive house was empty, save for me, Marcus, and my parents. They were standing alone in the center of the room, stripped of their audience, stripped of their assets, and completely exposed. I had not yelled once. The truth had done all the heavy lifting. The fallout over the next 2 months was swift and merciless. Without my savings and without the ability to mortgage my property, my parents could not afford the high-powered, luxury defense attorney they desperately wanted for Chloe. They had to settle for an overworked public defender who took one look at the mountain of federal evidence and advised her to take a plea deal. Chloe, realizing her parents could no longer buy her way out of consequences, finally cracked. She turned state's evidence, offering to testify against the other corrupt executives in her firm in exchange for leniency. Even with her cooperation, the judge was not amused by her blackmail attempts. She was sentenced to 3 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by extensive community service and a court order to pay massive financial restitution. The golden child was officially a convicted felon. For my parents, the collapse was absolute. The bankruptcy they had been dodging for years finally caught up to them. The bank repossessed my father's Porsche right out of the driveway in broad daylight. Their credit cards were cancelled. The country club formally expelled them due to the public scandal and unpaid dues. The high society friends they had spent decades impressing stopped returning their calls. They became social pariahs in their own community. And then came the final blow. Marcus drafted a formal, 30-day eviction notice. We had the sheriff's department serve it to them. They were legally ordered to vacate my property. I heard through the family grapevine that they tried to fight it, screaming to anyone who would listen that I was throwing my own parents onto the street. But nobody cared anymore. Aunt Clara and Uncle David completely cut contact with them. The day they moved out, I sat in my car parked down the street, watching through the windshield. There were no professional movers. Just my father, looking 10 years older, loading trash bags full of clothes into the back of a rented U-Haul truck. My mother was sobbing on the front steps, holding a box of cheap knickknacks. They were moving into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town. The illusion was dead. The karma they had been outrunning their entire lives had finally caught them. I watched the U-Haul pull away, feeling nothing but a profound, quiet emptiness. 2 weeks after the eviction, my phone rang. It was late, raining heavily outside. I looked at the caller ID. It was Evelyn. Against my better judgment, I pressed accept. I did not say hello. I just listened to the dead air on the line. Arya? My mother's voice was small, shaking, stripped of all its former arrogance. Arya, please do not hang up. I leaned back in my chair. What do you want? She started crying, a desperate, ugly sound. It is terrible here. The apartment has mold. Your father cannot find a job because his reputation is ruined. We have nothing. Please, sweetie. You have that massive house all to yourself. We just need a place to stay. Just a guest room. Let us come back. We are a family. We can fix this. I closed my eyes. I pictured myself lying in the ICU, listening to my own ribs grind together every time I breathed, staring at the phone, praying for my mother to care whether I lived or died. I pictured the text message she sent me. I kept my voice perfectly flat. The temperature of ice. Evelyn, I said softly. You are an adult. You need to figure it out. It is pointless to waste my time talking to you on the phone when I have my own life to live. You should be happy for my success instead of making everything about you. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She recognized her own words. The exact words she had texted me while I was bleeding in a hospital bed. Please, she whispered. I hung up. I went into my phone settings and blocked her number. I blocked my father's number. I blocked their emails, their social media accounts, everything. I closed the blast doors to my life, sealing them out permanently. I did not feel guilty. I did not feel cruel. I just felt safe. Over the next year, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My ribs healed, my leg grew strong again, and I finally threw my crutch into the dumpster. I moved out of my small apartment and into the colonial house. I did not keep it as a museum to my grandparents or a monument to my parents' failure. I hired contractors, tore down the oppressive wallpaper, let the natural light in, and made it entirely my own. Without the constant, draining anxiety of trying to win my parents' impossible approval, my career skyrocketed. I channeled all my energy into my work and was promoted to a senior executive position, pulling in a salary that secured my future completely. But the most surprising part of the aftermath was the family I gained. By cutting off the cancer of my parents, the rest of the family tree began to heal. Aunt Clara and Uncle David became regulars at my house. We hosted Thanksgiving dinner in the very same dining room where my father had tried to destroy me. Only this time, the table was filled with laughter, warmth, and genuine respect. There was no boasting, no judging, no golden child to worship. Just normal, flawed, wonderful people breaking bread together. I learned that family is not defined by who shares your DNA. Blood might make you relatives, but loyalty, respect, and mutual care are what make you family. I realized I had not lost a family at all. I had simply pruned away the dead branches so the healthy ones could finally grow. People often ask me if I have forgiven them. If I will ever visit Chloe in prison, or if I will ever check on my parents in their tiny apartment. Society puts a massive burden on victims of family abuse to forgive and forget. We are told that holding on to anger is toxic. I have found my own truth about forgiveness. I have forgiven them in my heart, purely so I do not have to carry the heavy weight of their hatred anymore. I do not wish them harm. I do not lie awake at night plotting further revenge. I simply do not care about them. But forgiveness does not equal reconciliation. You can forgive a snake for biting you because it is in its nature, but you do not invite the snake back into your bed. I established a boundary made of solid steel, and I will never compromise it. The best revenge I ever got was not the legal trap. It was not the eviction. The absolute best revenge was walking away and building a brilliant, peaceful, and abundant life completely without them. I took the broken pieces they handed me and built a castle they are never allowed to enter. Thank you for listening to my story. The world can be a brutal place, and sometimes the deepest cuts come from the people who were supposed to protect us. But I want you to remember this: you are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm, even if they are your own parents. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to protect your peace. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own sanity? Share your story in the comments below. Let us build a community of survivors here. And do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your boundaries, and never apologize for putting your own healing first.